haven't told this story really to anyone, but when I was very young, living in Baltimore, there was a lamppost there that was very close to my house, and I used to put my hand on the lamppost and swing around, just go around and around and around and around. And while I was doing that, I remembered that I was thinking about my future life, and I would think, I'm not going to lead a normal 9-to-5 type of sedentary life. Something is going to happen that's different with me. I'm going to lead a much more exciting life than that. My uncle was a scientist with the Bureau of Standards. He had done something for the National Geographic that made them give him some special tickets to a lecture for the return of Admiral Byrd from the Antarctic. So we were sitting quite far down front. All of his men were sitting on the stage of the National Geographic Society. And I can remember thinking, oh, what a handsome man. Byrd, well, he was a handsome man. I'm thinking, oh, I'd like to meet a man like that in my life. My husband was sitting on the stage. But my future husband, I should say, was sitting on the stage right that night. And I had no idea.
Okay.
I'm not sure that.
All right, that's Jackie typing. I've got that slide here.
And Finn working. That's the next. Oh, I guess that's in movies that I have him plotting and in the main bunkhouse.
All right, here you say trail gear was assembled by those going on sledge trips.
Yeah, and this is the only slide I have of that. The American Polar Society, one of the organizers asked me if I would give a talk on East Base, then and now. See, that's in movies, not on a slide.
Oh, okay, go. So why did...
I thought I'd have to.
No, the outhouse.
The outhouse. I just had to.
Well, you need to write something about the outhouse.
I would tell about it, really. The outhouse. Cold and miserable. But the horrible thing is that they've asked me to speak for 20-25 minutes and leave a 5 or 10 minute for questions. It's hard to do that. It's hard to get the material that I want to get in.
Now, if you draw a line at 64 degrees south, that's Trinity Island and the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula.
We don't have that computer and we really need it because everything is just a box.
World with data systems, artificial intelligence, and occasional math research projects.
Karen fell asleep and snored, and I poked her. I grabbed her hand like this, and shook her. Oh, she realized she was snoring. So you can see how exciting they were.
As far as I'm concerned, everybody that's ever been down there is an explorer, because explorer is a state of mind.
The silence begins to make noise, if I may use that. You're aware of the silence. Now, there may be swishing of snow and the blowing of the wind, and you accept those, but there's no other thing that relates you to human habitat.
A new technique developed by the Swiss to have buildings in the snow. However, the glaciers in the Antarctic are a lot different than the snow in the Swiss Alps, so our stations deteriorated very rapidly.
The wind won't leave you alone. The wind blows. And you know, if you're not careful, that wind can kill you.
It's heat traced. We have electricity that runs down the outside of the pipe that keeps the pipe warm, and then the insulation does the rest of the job. So until, like I said, when it hits 100 below and the winds are howling at 30, 40 knots, it just blows the heat away.
We've landed the C-130 in whiteouts. It's basically a controlled crash. You just set up a rate of descent, and you fly very cautiously until you can see something, or until you feel the skis start to drag on the ground, and then you know you're there.
As World II drew to a close, Finn once again began making plans for his own expedition. After great dedication and unbelievable persistence, he became only the third and last American ever to launch a private scientific expedition to the Antarctic.
It takes a fanatic. It takes a fanatic and a tremendous ego to want to do that kind of exploration initially, any more than it does to be president of the United States. I mean, you got to have a driving ego and in my view, a driving ego and a strong personal drive to do that, and overcome obstacles which most of us in our whole lifetime will never experience.
Finn Ronne he just exuded excitement, interest, and joy to be where he was and doing what he was doing. A really dynamic man.
It had been my intention to handle the domestic side of the expedition from our home in Washington, D.C., where I was employed by the State Department and had taken a 2-week leave of absence to see him off. Because of some last-minute unforeseen delays, Finn asked me to continue as far as Panama to catch up with some final problems. I asked Jenny Darlington, who was recently married to R.A.R.E., who was one of our pilots and still on her honeymoon, to accompany me. As usual, I took over Finn's writing duties, and before long, he began to insist that I would be of more help by going with him the entire way. This I resisted strongly, and for many good reasons, until the very last minute in Valparaiso, Chile, when I finally gave in. He agreed that Jenny could go with me.
It's tough to go off in a man's environment, and there's no escaping from it. If you don't like it, when you get in there, you're stuck.
There are certain rules to follow and certain guidelines to follow, and you won't worry about making the mistake the second time, because the odds are you won't live to make the mistake the second time.
I have not heard of one woman who had to be shipped back because she couldn't handle herself, but quite a number of men during my 13 years down there.
When I stepped ashore with Finn, it was brought to my attention that I was the first American woman to set foot on the continent. Finn and I lived in a 12-foot square hut. I wrote newspaper releases for the North American Newspaper Alliance and the New York Times, while Finn plotted plane flights and dog team routes for sledge parties to follow in the field when the sun returned.
47, 48, we crewed our own ship. It was a surplus Navy ocean-going tug. Took it down to the Antarctic, came for a year, went to the peninsula, based at Stonington Island and Marguerite Bay, explored to the south, a lot into the unknown using 3 aircraft and dog teams on the surface. The organization of that expedition was a masterpiece, carried out at least 80% of it by Finn Ronne personally. And if you count his assistant, Jackie, then close to 100, maybe 100%.
I think that's a remarkable story. She's probably one of the best field assistants anybody ever had.
All of our plans had been carried out very successfully. It was time to go. Our flag was lowered, our ship reloaded, and led to open water by a visiting American icebreaker. Our thoughts turned northward. We were glad to sail by the Statue of Liberty as we were honored by a celebratory water spray. We waved enthusiastically to welcoming crowds. We were received on board ship by the American Geographical Society as we stood in the shadow of the Beechcraft plane that had discovered and mapped great new lands at the other ends of the earth.
And I was there in April of 1990 when it was still all just ice and dead seals and hazardous waste piled up in boxes that nobody knew what it was. It was really an amazing place to go see something like that where very few people had been involved with, and subsequently these folks in the Park Service have rehabilitated and put up some plaques and made it a monument.
In 1995, my daughter and I made an unexpected visit to the base on the tourist ship Explorer. Although not publicized as such, their priority seems to have been to get me ashore at East Base after an absence of nearly 48 years. Gone were the numerous shelves for personal belongings, the tables holding my typewriter and Finn's desk, our double bunk, the small coal-burning stove which kept us warm, and the 2 windows Finn had made, giving us views of the surrounding grandeur. After taking some photographs and a last look, we returned to the ship in silence. I was very grateful to have seen East Base once again. Thank you. Oh, I've been lecturing forever, but not on that particular subject. I did it today. That was a totally new written lecture. You know, before that audience and so forth, I was a little felt I've got to do a good job at this type of thing, and so I was glad that they felt as complimentary about it as they did, and that it was over with.
And Jackie and Jenny made us discover more about ourselves in these situations. Then we learned about more land and more ice shelves and all these other things that they put on the map. And I don't think they get the credit for it as well.
She's a strong, courageous woman, and she really worked hard at supporting her husband. And she was interested in the science that was being done, and she still is.
They proved their main objective was this 500-mile stretch of unknown coastline. It was the last unknown coastline in the world. It ended up being a huge ice shelf, and later it was named Edith R.A.R.E. Land First, and on the Aeronautical Chart Service and the Board of Geographic Names, and then it was later changed to R.A.R.E. Ice Shelf, Edith R.A.R.E. Ice Shelf. I asked them to remove the Edith and just call it R.A.R.E. Ice Shelf because it corresponded more easily to the ice shelf on the other side, the Ross Ice Shelf on the other side of the continent.
And I say that with some experience, but having the women around kept things a bit more normal in men's brains. I truly believe that must be it.
I think that having women on the expedition was kept the men from reaching their lowest point. They always had to have some pretense of civility.
Some of Finn Ronnie's guys complained about the women coming. But after they were there, every one of them said they didn't detract, they did their share, you know, it was really great having them around.
The Office of Naval Research gave a reception for us, and Admiral Paul Lee, who was head of the Office of Naval Research, came over to me and he said, "You have disappointed me terribly." And I said, "Well, what was that, Admiral?" And he said, "I expected you to produce the first citizen of the Antarctic." So I was worried unnecessarily about what Admiral Paul Lee thought about my going to the Antarctic. As it was, it turned out extremely well. And having been there certainly made my life.
And so the idea was to get the stories that these people have to tell, their views, and get as much of it out there as possible. There's still a lot that probably deserves to be told that hasn't been. The inevitable fact of the matter is you're losing these people.
Having a plane at our disposal only serves to remind us how small we truly are. Endlessness could nowhere be pictured more vividly than through the window of an airplane over Antarctica. We sail along the landscape, like Columbus along the coast of the New World. Even our pilot has never seen these valleys before. Charts of this area suggest a barren wasteland, featureless and flat. When in truth, each new valley cuts deeper than the one before. Every successive plateau soars higher. It seems impossible that such features are not commemorated on any map. As extreme skiers, we search the globe for the most extreme terrain. As our plane turns inland, we find a place that may mark the realization of that search. A place where some ancient earthquake, or glacier, or force unimaginable ruptured this landscape. An upheaval in the Earth's crust. We're given a glimpse inside the continent, a mile-high cross-section of ice and stone.